to introduce Roberto Nardi, this time not with the AIA, although he's making a tour of the United States again for the American Institute of Archaeology, but this time supported by the Department of the History of Art History here. So we have a nice group of art historians, so welcome. It's a great pleasure to introduce Roberto, when people ask me who Roberto is, I always say he's the Rolls-Royce of conservation. He is the maximum you can actually imagine. Those of you who came to the presentation he gave on Zeugma last October, I think you were dazzled by what he had done there. He is, though, if I may say, he is someone rather special because he is a magician doing conservation, but that's largely because he has two great skills. Well, one great skill, he knows how to work with people, he knows how to manage. And his ultimate goal, if I may say, is that he can work with archaeologists and he can train both archaeologists and particularly people involved in conservation to the highest degree. And over the years, he's done that in a great many places. He was telling me over lunch today, Syria is the latest place, and Damascus, where he's training a new generation of mosaicists. But he's done it in Israel, he's done it in Tunisia, he's done it in Italy, and he did it while we worked together at Zeugma in Turkey. And this, to me, seems one of the most remarkable parts of his CV, because, frankly, he's done it as a private operator, always working with major institutions. In other words, he's brought together all sorts of different institutional authorities through his own passion. Now, I should tell you, though, before you see this talk, that Roberto started as a bona fide archaeologist and then became a conservator, which is perhaps why he understands archaeology so well. Part of that great circus that Andrea Carandini created, amongst others at Sette Finestre in Italy back in the 1970s. But anyway, it's as a conservator that he's renowned, and amongst the many, many wonderful places that he's been working on, this one, the monastery of St. Caterina in Sinai, sticks out. It is quite sublime, and so you're in for a treat. Those of you who haven't heard it already, this is a majestic project. Roberto.
Well, after a similar presentation, I should shut up and go back home. I'm sure it would be better. Thank you, Richard. It's a great pleasure to be back here with you. I'm learning that Philadelphia is a place full of friends and full of very nice people interested in archaeology and in conservation, and that's why I accepted with great pleasure to come this time again to present this last project that we officially should have finished. We are on the way of finishing it. The opening of the work site is a matter of next coming months, but the technical work actually is finished. So this was a very intense project, because intense from the technical point of view, because it was an extremely difficult task that we faced, and it was also emotionally very intense, because it's a very famous monument, was very much in danger, and because the environment where the mosaic and the monastery is inserted, and because the presence of the monastic community that probably has been the great treasure that we brought back home with us, the contact with the fathers of the monastery of St. Caterina. And this is why I decided not to prepare, not to give to you a formal talk tonight, but just to guide you, to accompany you to a trip in the monastery of St. Caterina, and give some commentaries live to the images that you will see. The story of this project started in 1999, well, no, really, the story of this project started in the mid-6th century when Justinian decided to build the monastery. And if we want to be more precise, the story of this project started probably when Moses passes by there with his community on the way to Holy Land. And just to give you a touch of how thick is the history in that place. It's unbelievable how almost everything happened there. And this there is the most hidden place of the world that you can imagine. The monastery is located in the middle of a Sinai peninsula at the slope of the mountains where Moses received the sacred plates of the law from God. And this doesn't go on. And was built, as I said before, mid-6th century at behest of Emperor Justinian in the place known and revered as the site where Moses spoke to God in front of the burning bush. What's going on? Anyone of you has an idea of what's going on? Yes.
Here
we are. Here we are. There is no sound. Sorry for this, but this is making this presentation normal. And the plug is this. Yes.
Now it's coming.
A little short in volume. A little more volume, please. Okay, that's good. Hold the second.
Yeah, breathe.
Okay. Okay. So this is the sound that accompany you every time you are in Sinai. The monastery is located at 4,500 feet in altitude. At the mountain, it's 9,000 feet. So it's pretty high, and this makes the weather pretty comfortable. Probably the characteristic of the monastery is that it has never been violated in the centuries. That explains why it is so rich. He owned one of the richest libraries existing and an incredible quantity of icons and other treasures inside. And the reason it has never been violated is simply the good policy of tolerance that the monks have practiced day by day in between the local populations. The site and the monastery has been documented during all the history by many travelers and pilgrims. What you see, the drawings I've used belongs to Roberts, and I've used them to show you the comparison on how small the change happened in these centuries. One of the oldest witnesses of the site is Egeria, a Roman noblewoman who in the year 383 visited the site and left a diary, and she said that in that place there was a church with a priest and with many hermits, and that they visited the place. She was hosted by the priest, and then on Sunday, deep in the night, they started the ascent to the holy mountain, and at the 4th hour in the morning, they finally reached the holy summit of the Mount Sinai. If you go today, you can have exactly the same experience. The presence of the monks never stopped in the centuries on the place, and they ran a very rich and flourishing spiritual life in the place. They are about 25. This is a practice that happens once a week. I'm sorry I cannot bring with me the good smell of the fresh bread, but believe me, it's something wonderful you never forget. And for example, the distribution of bread is something that has been a classical tradition since centuries. Distribution of bread to the Bedouins of the region. Today, they don't distribute bread anymore, but they distribute work. That means sustainable economy for the local tribes. Few weeks ago, I phoned the bishop asking how was going on the situation with the happening in Egypt, and he was very relaxed and very happy, and he said the Egyptian military and police left and the Bedouins entered to protect the monastery. So again, once again, the Muslim Bedouins are protecting a Christian site. Inside the fortified walls is the church, was built by Stefano of Ayla. Is an architect. Ayla is the actual Aqaba. Was built in 550. The church is full of original decorations, and amongst them you can admire one of the most important works of early Byzantine art, which is the mosaic of the Transfiguration. In front of the church is a small minaret showing evidence of the good coexistence of religions in this place. The mosaic is a work of extraordinary importance for its complexity and for the iconographic message that it delivers, and for the richness of the original techniques. There is a Christ in the center. He is surrounded by a mandala of strips of different blue tones of tesserae. His face is centered in a gold halo in the middle of a cross, and he shines light through 8 rays made of gold and silver tesserae. He is surrounded by Moses and Elijah, by Petros, by Peter, John, and James and Jacob. The main arch tells the stories of Moses in front of the burning bush and Moses receiving the plate. The central figure is surrounded by medallions depicting the apostles. During the centuries, the monastery and the mosaic suffered earthquakes, windstorms, rain, that affected the mosaics a lot. An intense liturgical activity produced great quantities of smoke with the candles and with the incense. The church is the center of the spiritual life of the Greek Orthodox community. That means 3,000 visitors per day in the 3 hours when the monastery is open. The calculation is pretty easy. Give 1,000 per hour for the 3 days. So you can imagine the impact of this mass of people concentrated in that time. Then is the paradise. The monastery is absolutely silent and quiet. But all this activity of visitors produce a great quantity of dust, of smoke, that was deposited on the surfaces of the mosaics in terms of soot and dust. The earthquakes affected the mosaic a lot, and in fact, when we arrived, this was the situation. What you see in red is the mosaic, where the mosaic is fully detached from the wall. The first time I came here was in 1999, in early 2000, when from the Getty Conservation Institute they phoned me asking to go and check which was the situation. I accepted, but I said, yes, but I will be able to give only 2 weeks, because we were just at the beginning, on the opening of the Zugma project. Richard knows something about this. So we definitely had no time for other projects. And I went there for 2 weeks. Then it happened that we remained for 5 years. But what I found when I climbed up to this level with a very tiny, slim and high scaffold, and I touched the mosaic was moving up the point that I was not sure if it was the scaffold moving or the mosaic. And in fact, it was the mosaic. All this area, all the red was totally detached from the wall. That here can be worrying, but if you imagine that here we are in the middle of the Alps with a shape like this, and the mosaic was detached of 6 centimeters right by the face of Christ. When I asked the fathers, I don't understand how the mosaic is still here. They told me, yes, we have an idea of who is holding the mosaic. And so that's why we decided that there was something was needed there. But when I came back and I spoke with my staff and I said, listen, this is the situation. I don't know if it's the case that we put ourselves in this trap, because this is going to be really one of the most difficult work that we have done. And the youngest conservator looked at me surprised for my titubanza, you say, for my words. And he said, listen, but somebody has to do that, so why not us? And in fact, we decided to go and check what we could do. Obviously, what was really scaring us was the section near the face of Christ. Can you notice from here that the shape is not the correct one? This plate in red show the loss that we found. When we came there, 20,000 tiles were gone over the surface. That correspond to 4% of the entire surface. So 20,000 over 500,000 tiles who the mosaic is made of. A small plate dating 1847 tells us that in that day a Russian monk named Samuel went to St. Catherine and restored the mosaic. It's remarkable that Samuel did his work by himself in 2 years, and us in 15 spent 5 years. And he put iron pins, and mainly he sealed the large quantity of gaps by using gypsum painted as fake mosaic. So he was incredibly modern in his attitude, Samuel. And in fact, what you see in green is the work that Samuel implemented. But on the other hand, if you imagine that the mosaic is made of glass, that means shining in the light, the Samuel work was something not reflecting the light. And if on top of that you consider the soot and the dust, this explains most probably why no one in the old time reported news or commented the mosaic. There are many descriptions of the inside of the church, but surprisingly, no one ever spoke of the mosaic. And on the other hand, this led many scholars saying that the reason was simply because the mosaic was done in the 18th century. And there were no evidence because there was no mosaic before. But the truth probably is that because the mosaic was so dirt and so hidden on the other side of the iconostasis that the travelers did not even notice it. This is a work of Samuel, other example. This picture belongs to the American mission of 1955, when Kurt Weitzman guided two groups, one from Princeton University and another one from Michigan University. Princeton and Michigan University, yes. And I thought this young guy was Ernst Hawkins, the restorer who restored Hagia Sophia and Karya Cami in Istanbul. But then I learned from Bob this morning that this was his young Turkish assistant. I was wondering how young he was to have already restored, but I say he's a conservator, so he's well concerned. And please notice this young father here. We will meet him again. So they came at that time, 1959, and they were supposed to stay 2 months, but then they realized how bad was the condition of the mosaic that they extended 1 month their stay there, trying to do what they could. And in fact, they inserted about, I don't remember exactly, around 20 more pins around the face, bronze pin, copper pins, around the face of Christ, trying to hold the mosaic temporarily. And when they came back, Kurt Weitzman wrote an article on the National Geographic saying, please hurry up because the mosaic of the Transfiguration is falling down. 50 years have gone since that moment, and luckily we found the mosaic still there in its place. Our project started in the year 2005 when the Emir of Qatar allocated a sum for the conservation of the mosaic. So we went there just right after the Zukma project was finished, and we started the work that lasted 5 years. These are our friends, the brothers Danil and Theochristos, that helped us in building the scaffolding that allowed us to work safe for 5 years without disturbing the life and the activity of the church. The work mainly consisted in documentation, cleaning, consolidation, and fixing of the gaps. This is a one-to-one reproduction of the mosaic that we applied on the face of the scaffolding on the side of the scaffolding facing looking the church, not to interfere with the life of the church. Last Sunday I was at the Met, and at the end of the lecture 3 art historians came to me and they said, please don't tell us that the scaffold is still up. And I say, why? And they say, because we have been there last year and we have been admiring the mosaic and speaking of the mosaic, and we came back convinced of the beauty of the mosaic, and now we realize that we have been looking at the photograph. When we discussed in the year 2000, we discussed the project to the bishop, everything seems to go fine, but at the very end he came out with a small detail, and he informed me that because the mosaic is into the altar, that means the Sancta Sanctorum, no women were allowed to work. And I said, my dear bishop, here there is a problem because 90% of my conservators are women. So we must find a solution. And the solution was to build a scaffolding totally isolated from the church, with an access, the only access through the window of the roof, so that the women were not working in the altar, but above the altar. They had a long meeting and they decided that this was fair, and the women have been allowed it to work.
Δόξα Πατρί και Υιό και Αγίο Πνεύματι, νεάν ίσο πίσω σου, ακολουθούσαν σοι προσεντίνετε.
You can see a very special thing from this picture. This is the original wooden roof that you never can see because the 17th century new roof. And on these wooden beams that are polychrome and painted, there is the signature of Stefano of Aila and the dedication to Justinian and Theodora. It's really unbelievable. It seems I really could not believe that all this was true. It seems to be painted and signed the months before. And you never see this because we accidentally opened the roof because the picture that we were going to insert is really beautiful. I don't understand why they keep on hiding it with a 17th century wooden roof, painted wooden roof, but that is. The work started with the documentation on computer of everything we found. All the documentation has been implemented directly on the scaffolding by using tablet computers and mainly using one-to-one pictures at high resolution that allow us to keep trace of everything we did. Another example is this plate. In this plate you can see where our consolidants acted. So what you see in light blue are the areas that have been interested by the infiltration of our mortar. And what you see in darker blue are the area where we are not convinced on the efficiency of our work. And this is a plate that will be given to who in 5 years will go there to implement the maintenance program. So let's say that these in light blue are the checking point for the maintenance, for the future maintenance of the monument. Another opportunity that we had was to study the original technique of the mosaic. For example, the study of the detection and study of the giornate. The giornate are the working day they spend to implement the mosaic. As you know, to realize a mosaic, you have a block structure, you have a wall, then on the wall you apply the intonaco, and on the intonaco you design, you draw the lines, and then on top of it, when the intonaco is still fresh, you insert the tessere. So you can insert the tessere until the point the intonaco is fresh. And comparing the season, this can go from 1 day up to 3 days. So you have to be careful in applying the proper quantity of intonaco corresponding to what you will do that day, and then you apply the tessera. This is called giornata, that means day, working day. And in some areas, we were able to detect the lines of the different working days that you can see here. And through this study, we discovered that they started from the top and then they came back. At the beginning, we were thinking exactly the opposites, but they did this way. Of course, not all the giornate are designed here because we were not able to find all of them, but some. You see, this is another giornata. And this is mortar overlapping this section. This means that when they apply the mortar here, the previous section was already done. This is another element that was surprising us a lot. You see this color here. This black color is painted on the plaster, and then there is a red, and then there is green, and then there is red again. This means that when they prepared the mosaic, they did not only design the shape and the external line of the figures, but they applied full colors on the wool surfaces, on the wool of the entire surface of the mosaic, just like this is yellow, this is red again, just like a code. And this is the map of all the colors that we found. And for them, for example, red meant gold, and any one of these colors had a code to help the mosaicist. So in reality, under the tiles, there is this distribution of colors. And the colors play at least 3 roles. The first one is to guide the mosaicist in inserting the tiles. Second is supporting the result, the intensity of the color of the tile, because the tile is partially transparent. So if in the back it has color, the color that comes out is much more intense. Third, the spaces in between the tessere are not white, but they are colored. So in reality, the result, the final aesthetical result of the mosaic of St. Catherine is not given only by the tiles, but it's also given by the fresco colors applied before the implementation of the mosaic. We were extremely surprised for this. It's almost the first time that we find something at this level, and this confirms the richness of the operation. This confirmed that whoever ordered this mosaic was very rich and very powerful. That means the emperor. The palette was again very rich. We found there 35 different colors. That for a mosaic of this age is a lot. Then you see the gold tesserae in the arch. They are not flat, but they are tilted 45 degrees, looking at the church. And this was made in order to better reflect the light coming from the windows and the light from the lamps and the candle. So nothing was accidental there. So all the tesserae are looking the body, the main church. We were so scared for the state of deterioration of the mosaic that we decided not to touch the mosaic by the moment a metal structure was built. So in short term, we built up this kind of spider that was fixed directly to the walls of the church to avoid the vibrations of the scaffolding, to let us put in these props to hold the mosaic when we were working. We were really convinced that the first tile that we were taken off, everything would have fall down. And so the first thing we did has been to build up this structure. And then the work started. The work began with the cleaning, vacuuming the dust from the surfaces. And when we were doing this process, we had a nice surprise of discovering that a great quantity of tiles were moving. So they were not attached anymore to the intonagon. The computer is tired today. I don't know what's happening. So there was not only the problem that we knew of the detachment of the supporting mortars from the wall, but there was even a problem of detachment of the tiles from the setting bed. When the fixing of the moving tesserae ended, we started the consolidation of the mosaic, of the body of the mosaic itself, and this was done by producing small holes in between the tesserae, inserting this vacuum cleaner connected to dentist tools in order to vacuum out the dusty mortar that was not holding anymore. So when this process was finished, the hollow spaces were washed by using distilled water, and then the infiltration of hydraulic lime made of the same component as the original started. And then step by step, with a process that lasted years, we proceeded with the consolidation. And as the consolidation progressed, the props are applied to hold the mosaic and protect the mosaic for the time that the consolidant is liquid. When the consolidant set, we can take off the props. The sounds you see come directly from the church, it's not added. Then, after 3 years that we were turning around to the main problem, we decided that it was the time to go and fix the main hollow space by the face of Christ. So we decided first to consolidate all the rest of the mosaic, and then when this process was finished, we decided to touch the problem number 1. Also because we were tired and not sleeping well in the night. So we faced on the surface with synthetic material. That's why we wear the masks. And then we decided to try to understand the origin of the problem. We didn't want to do as Samuel, that went there fixing the problem without understanding the origin. So we decided to open a section 20 centimeter by 20 centimeter because we were suspecting that the granite structure was fractured. Then we discovered, you can see the red, we discovered that the setting bed was completely fractured, and we decided to remove also that. And then we have been lucky enough to open exactly in correspondence of a joint between 2 granite blocks that appeared completely sealed and safe. Nevertheless, The detached area was so big that we were able to insert an endoscope inside and investigate the rest of the state of the granitic structure. So the problem was not structural, but was for the water coming in the Middle Age through the window on the above the Christ. Understood that, well, this made a big difference for us, because if the problem was as we suspected, I mean a crack in the vault of the apse, this would have meant for us to go outside the church, open the vault, open the apse from the outside, right to the crack, consolidate the wall structure, reclose the apse, and then go back working to the mosaic. But that was not the case, so we have been able to go immediately, directly to the bulged area and consolidate it with the same technique we use for all the rest. Where we opened, we reapplied using the same technique of 2 stratum of mortar, painted with red ochre as it was in origin, and then flipped back the mosaic as the cover of a book. A friend of mine told me, you have been very brave in filming on this, because if things were gone wrong, what you did, I said, I could always not show the pictures. I don't pretend that you trust me that the work was successful, but you can see that there is no trace of our opening anymore. So when the consolidation was finished, we finally could remove the greasy material on the surface of the mosaic, and this was done applying a very light solvent made of ammonium carbonate that was left on place in position for 15 minutes by using paper pulp, and then removed with a tease brush and sponges. So you remember the young father that I showed you in the previous picture? He was Eumonius, Father Eumonius, that was a very young father when the American came in Sinai. And here is him, 15 years later. He followed day after day all our work. And one day I told Eumonius, I'm very glad that you are so interested in restoration. And he said, I'm partially interested in restoration. The real reason for me being here is to control what you are doing. At the beginning, the conservators were a little impressed by Eumonius, then they became friends. So during the cleaning, also the stucco fillings of Samuel were removed, because made of gypsum and cement that could damage the surfaces. And we discovered that he covered many original tesserae. So we brought out sections of the original part. Look here how much was covered. Remarkable. Then we removed the pins, because being iron they might deteriorate the mosaic in the future, and because there was no more need, because now the mosaic is fully consolidated. We left only one as a memory of a very good work done in the 19th century. This is the one that we left on place. The result of the cleaning was a terrible situation made of hundreds of hollow spaces in the mosaic that made necessary a decision on the technique to use for the filling of the gaps. And at that point we had three options. The first one was to leave the gaps open. The second was to use a technique similar to the one used by Samuel, that means using mortar and paint it with watercolor. And the third was to use tiles made in glass. According to the ethic of conservation, this last option should be not used because otherwise you get the risk of making fakes. But probably this is one great lesson that we learn in Saint Catherine. Well, the premise of this story is that we implemented the documentation at 1-to-1 scale. That means that every single tile for us has a name and surname, as a file, and as an easy identification on the computer. So all the new tiles eventually inserted in the mosaic can be easily recognizable through the computer. That means avoiding the risk of making fakes. But more than this, what we learn in going in St. Catherine and what mixed up 100% my attitude, because I went there convinced to know what to do, but then I ended that I didn't know anymore what to do there. What I learned is that the mosaic of St. Catherine was not a piece of archaeology, was not a work of art, was not a dead monument, but was part of a church that never ended and never stopped to live. And this means two things. First, this is not a work of art, but this is an instrument to pray for the monks and the faithful. Point two, this mosaic belongs to very clever and intelligent people that knows better than us the use and the meaning of the mosaic. And my uncertainty increased night after night when the bishop used to come on the scaffold when all the conservators went to rest. I used to stay in the scaffolding and speak with the bishop of the mosaic and of the work. And night after night I started to discover that we were talking of two completely different things. I mean, I'm not a religion person, and at the beginning I could not even understand what the bishop was saying about the mosaic. But slowly I understood the deep significance of a work like this. All the images have a very specific and peculiar significance that tell a lot on the religion and to the believers. And that's why I started to keep my theories a little bit aside, trying to understand what the bishop was meaning. And mainly the bishop was meaning that the mosaic is a life piece, is a life work, that change is aspect any moment of the day when the light change is reflection on the mosaic. So the mosaic for them as at any time of the day, at any time of the night, a different aspect, and mainly that the mosaic is a window through two different worlds. And all this make me feeling smaller and smaller and smaller in my decisions. And when the bishop told me that they were strongly believing that to bring the mosaic back to its original appearance, to its original reflection to the light would have been the best solution, and mainly what they were strongly willing. I had nothing to object, and I decided that in fact this was the solution to take, even because only the materials made of glass can react in the years in the same way as the original one. And because this is a very hidden, faraway place, we cannot expect that in 10 years other conservator will go there for another restoration. We decided that at least to bring the mosaic back in its original homogeneity was the good solution. And that's what we did. We used mortars made again of the same composition as the original. On the mortar we applied the colors as the original, and then we used tiles made in Venice according to traditional techniques. And tiles by tiles the mosaic has been restored. But any new tile was added in the mosaic was recorded on the base maps. So when we refer to high resolution photograph, I speak to the possibility of recording every single tile. And this is an example. You can see from this map that you easily can read what we have done. And when I speak of high resolution photograph, I speak of this kind of photograph and at this scale. And this kind of detail was prepared on the entire surface. So you can imagine that this photograph is 300 dpi, and the size of the photograph is 15 feet by 15 feet. And when you have this kind of base, then you can record everything you want. This is another example of the map of what we did, and this is on the whole scale. I'll show you now this section here to show you the progress. This is before the restoration. This is the map of the giornate. This is the map of the detachment before. This is the color of the background. This is the composition of the tiles. This is our consolidation and the maintenance test. This is Samuel's work. This is our work. And this is after restoration. Other details that can be recognized thanks to these photographs. For example, this is another giornata. You see the line? This is another giornata. In this case, there is something interesting. They first did this part here, and they used this color. And then when they came back, they used other color because they ran out of the same color. This probably is due to the fact that this section here was a hole left on the mosaic to anchor the scaffold. So this in reality was closed way long after when they finished all the mosaic. Another demonstration of this is on the opposite side at the same level, where we found this square section that was related to another hole for the scaffold. the scaffold was made like this. So it is given that they needed holes on the walls. But probably one of the most interesting things is this part here. You can see these glass parts here they have a totally different shape than the other. They are slim, long, and they are made of glass, transparent glass, and they are used to design the profile of feet and hands. But in one of these we discovered traces of gold. So this means that this is the waste of the cutting of the gold tesseract. That they come like this. So from this section, well, this is the color. This is how the mosaic come in slabs of color glass. But for the gold, from this section, first they cut square sections with these tools. There is nothing new. This is a low relief in Ostia of the 4th century. The tools are the same. So they first cut the gold in the center of the piastra, but then all the glass left was used for designing the shape of hands and feet. And this tells us something extremely important. This tells us that the tesserae were cut in place. This means that the tesserae are not reused as many times it happened, and this means that they brought the raw material there and then they manufactured the mosaic in place. For example, in Ravenna there are many cases where this waste glass is used mixed to the gold to fill up the surfaces. So the result is not exactly a very intense gold. Here in St. Caterina never happened. They used gold where they had to put gold, and they used the waste of the glass to design the shape of the figures. Here you see the two traces of gold. There is also one here. So the work is finished. Some examples of before and after. I could not resist to put before and after. So thanks to the assistance of the fathers, and thanks to the very high quality of the original techniques, thanks to the financial support of an emir of an Islamic country, and thanks to the passion efforts of the conservator, the mosaic of the Transfiguration today is safe and stable in its position and can be admired again. And I think the most important lesson that I learned in the monastery is that the policy of tolerance in between religions and cultures that the monks have been practicing during 14 centuries is extremely successful. And considering the time today is also extremely useful for all of us. I let you enjoy the last pictures.